pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1715 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly and my partner, Dr. Bob Rodrigues of Duquesne University, way up there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In this episode, he's going to be continuing his presentation on the escalation of the Vietnam War. He will begin by sharing a portion of a speech Martin Luther King made way back in 1967 that had monumental effects on the entire country and the war efforts in Vietnam. So again, I recommend you get rid of all your distractions, get a piece of paper and a pencil, sit back and listen to the important things Dr. Bob is going to tell you about.
I'm going to play you a piece of this Riverside speech by Dr. Martin Luther King.
The time has come for America to hear the truth about this tragic war. I've chosen to preach about the war in Vietnam today because I agree with Dante that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a period of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. The truth of these words is beyond doubt. But the mission to which they call us is the most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom. There has never been such a monumental dissent during a war by the American people. Polls reveal that almost 15 million Americans explicitly oppose the war in Vietnam. Additional millions cannot bring themselves around to support it. This reveals that millions have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Now, of course, one of the difficulties in speaking out today grows out of the fact that there are those who are seeking to equate dissent with disloyalty. It's a dark day in our nation when high-level authorities will seek to use every method to silence dissent. Something is happening and people are not going to be silent. The truth must be told. And I say that those who are seeking to make it appear that anyone who opposes the war in Vietnam is a fool or a traitor or an enemy of our soldiers is a person who has taken a stand against the best in our tradition. Many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my past. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. So this morning I speak to you on this issue because I'm determined to take the gospel seriously. There is at the outset a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America.
Okay, so that was Dr. Martin Luther King in April of 1967. One note there, April 4th, 1967, when he delivered that speech at Riverside, exactly 1 year later, on April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated by a gunman. And this is ironic. We had a 1 year exact date, but nevertheless, this is what had occurred. In 1967, April, we have over 100,000 people in New York and San Francisco that begin to demonstrate against the war in Vietnam. And now you begin to see pretty pressing posters, stop the bombing, Vietnam War, end all peace, and to end all peace. No money for bombing and burning. U.S. mass murder in Vietnam. So these were some of the placards that were being held up at the various rallies. So it began to intensify. We believe around June, and this was done surreptitiously, but General William Westmoreland approached President Lyndon Johnson and requested for a troop hike of 210,250 troops. I believe it was 210. It might have been 201. I might have flipped the numbers. Essentially, this would have taken our number up to 750,000. And Johnson was really kind of set aback by it. He said, I'm being asked for 200,000. What if you come back next year and ask me for 150 more thousand? He says, when is this going to end? So he took it to his advisors, and eventually this was denied by the Joint Chief of Staffs. Now, this was not really discovered until 1971, 4 years later, by the New York Times, who revealed this. Now, this is going to play a part in, number one, Westmoreland stepping down after 1968, and also Lyndon Johnson deciding not to run for re-election in 1968. So this was a under-the-radar event that occurred in probably around May, June of 1967. Now, in September of 1967, Nguyen Van Thu, Nguyen Thieu, Nguyen Van Thu is going to be elected president of South Vietnam with 34% of the vote. So he gains a plurality and not a majority. And the reason for this was there were a number of people running for the presidency of South Vietnam, in addition to Nguyen Cao Ky. Nguyen Cao Ky and Nguyen Van Thu were the two main candidates, and Thu is going to defeat Ky in 1967. And for the most part, he's going to remain the president of South Vietnam almost till the very, very end. In 1967, the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, is going to begin to admit that the bombing campaigns against North Vietnam are ineffective. He delivers a secret memo to Lyndon Johnson, and he has 3 points. Number one, do not increase troops. 2, transition the war to the Arban. And 3, stop the bombing. Now, just a little reference here to the bombing. The United States dropped 7,078,032 million tons of bombs on Vietnam through the course of the war. Now, that number means nothing unless you see it in relation to how much we dropped during World War II. Here's the number. World War II, 2,057,244. Now, that is 3.5 times. In other words, the United States dropped 3.5 times the amount of bomb tonnage on Vietnam than we did throughout all of World War II. So that number now takes on significance. Otherwise, it's a blank number, 7 million. What is 7 million? What it indicated was that perhaps bombing was not the solution, and that what we were really doing, again, was increasing the resolve of the enemy. The man who replaced Robert McNamara was Clark Clifford. He was an old New Dealer, and Johnson had known him from those times, and he was considered a hawk regarding the Vietnam War. By hawk, we mean pro-war. Clifford is going to play another role in 1968. He is going to be part of what we know as the wise men, and I'll come back to that next time. He is going to play a role in Lyndon Johnson deciding not to run for the presidency in 1968. At the end of 1967, there was a spin put on the war. And by that I mean they launched something known as the Success Campaign. Westmoreland and Lyndon Johnson talked. I had mentioned earlier in the previous day, we talked about a tipping point. Well, to use Westmoreland's words, it was the crossover point. This is where the number of enemy killed surpasses what they can replace in the field. And so the strategy now shifted from search and destroy to body count. Okay, so that if you could, line up high numbers of body count, this would prevent the enemy from replacing all of these lost soldiers into the field. This was the strategy. Now, there was a flaw in this strategy. Oftentimes, commanders in the field would send out their units, and they would give them a quota, I'll say, of body count. And let's say if it was 150 and they came back and they said, well, we killed 6, well, go back out. And so now what happened is inflated numbers started to come back. Okay, so as a result, maybe an operation had netted 16 KIA of the enemy, but the report might have been 57. Okay, so this avoided having to redo the operation in the field. So it became a mess, a hodgepodge in many parts of the war. But that was the Success Campaign. That was the spin on it, including the ambassador Ellsworth Bunker to the Vietnam. He called it, the familiar phrase, the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, all this occurs in late 1967, just prior to the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive is going to begin on January 31st, 1968, and it's going to be the turning point of the Vietnam War. So things are going to change radically after this Success Campaign. I want to just preview the United States is going to be militarily successful in the Tet Offensive. However, that's the turning point of the war in the sense that the war begins to go downhill for the United States. And this was a public relations, this was the feeling at home, this was a feeling of malaise that permeated everything after the Tet Offensive. But we'll talk about that in the next episode. So by December 31st of 1967, American troop levels in Vietnam had reached 475,000. close to 500,000 troops. The killed in action that year was 11,153, almost double that of 1966. Okay, Mac, we're going to stop there, and this takes us right up to the point of the turning point.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bob. That was very interesting. I look forward with great anticipation to your next presentation when you're going to talk about the Tet Offensive. That's because I was there right in the middle of it. I got to see it close up. So it's going to be very interesting to hear what you have to say about it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1715 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?